Thank you very much for this introduction. This is the one thing I wanted to be highlighting, but also if you are in the area of Bayreuth in Upper Franconia, please also come to visit us in Turnau, which is a beautiful place. We have a great library there, and it's really unique also in the sense of the facilities and also the quiet place where you can do research on music theater. I will be quoting all my stuff in German, but don't worry, I will be referring to within my text to the quotes, so you probably will understand, even if you don't understand German, what I'm talking about. It is quite well known that women played a very important part in Richard Wagner's life, and they also had a great impact on his theatrical work. The one who probably influenced him most was the German soprano Wilhelmine Schröder-Devrient, born in 1804. She was 9 years older than Wagner, and age matters, as we know, and became famous at the beginning of the 1820s, after she started her singing career in Vienna. Wagner was especially intrigued by her performative skills and by her natural way of singing, as it was said. Also, he was struck by her personality. She, being a strong woman with masculine features on the one hand, and also representing femininity with the sensuality, physicality, and corporality in her stage appearance on the other hand. Dichotomies of that sort are basic for 19th century thinking and understanding of gender conception, clearly drawing a line between the roles men and women were supposed to play in any given 19th century mid-European society. Next to the man-woman dichotomy, there's the opposition to be highlighted I already mentioned. On the one hand, the singer, her body and her voice were experienced through the erotic lens as a female, and on the other hand, she was also looked at a genius. And that is a genius of performance, as Ludwig Rellstab and others pointed out. I actually explored that aspect within another piece, which I'm going to present at the Wagner conference in Leipzig in May this year. Here she was attributed a quality usually only given to men, and this conception of the androgynous seemed to have fascinated both the female and also the male admirers of her time. This paper will investigate how the performance of Wilhelmine Schröder-Devrient, as it was related to sexual and gender aspects, might have influenced Wagner, creating his Tannhäuser. The section after this introduction, the next section will explore the notion of working women, taking into account image and reputation of professional female singers in the 19th century with a focus on Schröder-Devrient. This will be also dealing briefly with Wagner's fascination with the literary group of Das junge Deutschland around Heinrich Laube. In the next section of the paper, we'll be looking at the singer's body, using Schröder-Devrient's iconography as a major source. I will be finally, in the fourth section, dealing with Wagner's Venus, very briefly, focusing on the opening of the opera and linking Venus' appearance to Schröder-Devrient's body. If you look for literature on Wilhelmine Schröder-Devrient, one of the first things which will be popping up is these memoirs. And this is a cover from an edition from 1981. Aus den Memoiren einer Sängerin, Wilhelmine Schröder-Devrient, zugeschrieben. And this is actually a two-part book, which was published in 2 volumes, and the first one came out in 1868, and the second one came out in 1875. The attribution of these memoirs to Wilhelmine Schröder-Devrient proved quickly to be wrong. which can be easily seen from the actual storyline in the novel, which narrates a whole different biography than hers. The only resemblance really between the main character of the book and Schröder-Devrient is the fact that both of them are stars of the operatic scene. The one in the novel is represented in the novel as a famous female singer, and the other one was actually perceived in the press and elsewhere a great star in real life. The novel actually is not so much about the female singer's general biography anyhow. It is mainly pornographic, considered today actually one of the classics of the genre. It is believed that the actual editor, C.W. Stern in Altona, near Hamburg, used the attribution of this novel to Schröder-Devrient in order to increase sales. She was dead at the point when the first volume came out for 8 years, and didn't, of course, know about this. That the connection between pornography and Wilhelmine Schröder-Devrient, who was a very, very famous person in the 19th century, a household name, was made, of course, is still of relevance, reflecting on the image of the singer. How was it possible that the name of Schröder-Devrient was used in that context? And I have 3 points to kind of look into this. First, since antiquity, there is a strong connection being made between the world of the theater and the world of prostitution. The image of being the goddess on the one hand and the whore on the other hand at the same time was attributed to actresses and female singers also in the 19th and still in the 20th centuries. The general connection of the life as an actress and her supposedly general availability and openness to men and sex is also indicated in our novel. The main character explains. I'm not going to read all of this, but just a couple of things in German, but you will understand through my paper. Sie kennen das Bühnenleben gut genug, um zu wissen, dass es mir weder an Huldigungen noch an Herrenbekanntschaften fehlen konnte. Kein Weib befindet sich, wenn es sich um die Gelegenheit, Eroberungen zu machen handelt, in günstigerer Position als gerade die Bühnenkünstlerin, die ihre Schönheit, ihr Talent von der Bühne herab vor den Augen von Tausenden entfaltet. Außerdem ist eine Bühnenkünstlerin ein öffentlicher Charakter, eine Zelebrität. Much later in 1928, there was also a regular novel published on her life. Therese Rie Andro in Vox Humana is still referring to the same image of Schröder-Devrient, which is suggested by the attribution of authorship to the pornographic novel. The difference is actually that the 1928 novel does not contain any explicit narration of sexual detail. Nach jeder Liebesnacht hätte sie den, mit dem sie verbracht, am liebsten nicht mehr wiedergesehen, obgleich der ein oder andere doch vielleicht wirkliche Zuneigung verdient hätte. The second reason why this attribution was made also has to do with her biography, actually, which was in many respects a very unusual one for a 19th century woman. First of all, she did work as a singer and made a lot of money, and much more money than actually her first husband, who was also an actor. She got divorced twice and actually lost, of course, both legal cases because of her minor legal status as a woman. She also had children, and she was not able to take care of them, also because of certain circumstances she was not responsible for. She, in fact, had lovers, except of the 3 husbands, the people in the 19th century, and also we know about today. And also, one other reason, or one other interesting thing is that her last husband was actually 14 years younger than she was herself. Most striking is still the fact, and that seems kind of banal to us, that she, as a successful singer, sticked with her career, despite the fact that she got married, which was very often the case the other way around, that singers stopped working once they got married. The third reason why the attribution was possible to be made has to do with the fact that Schröder-Devrient was a very public figure. The fact that she was a öffentlicher Charakter, as it was said, made her a projection field, if you want, for many fantasies, and that's true actually erotically and also like as a free spirit politically. During her lifetime, the reports in the newspapers, the powerful 19th century media, have to be highlighted. Not only many reviews on her performances were published, but also, since the early 1830s, extended essays on her. One is by Ludwig Rellstab from 1834, where he makes the connection of her performance to genius. Heinrich Laube's writings from 1831 until 1834 are of extreme interest within our case because of the context. Wagner, on the one hand, was very much influenced at that time of his career by Laube and the ideas of Das junge Deutschland, both politically and also aesthetically. Laube, on the other hand, made Schröder-Devrient the center of his theater aesthetics, relating this to his political ideas. Especially Wilhelm Heinz's free-spirited novel Ardinghello from 1787 had a great impact on Wagner, as Michael Pegatzky in his study Das poröse Ich pointed out in 2002. Wagner's Das Liebesverbot from 1834, with its carnival theme, where Schröder-Devrient was a model for the part of Isabella, deals with the freedom of love, and that's also in a physical way, as relevant for Laube and Das junge Deutschland. My next section, the singer's body. As Michel Poisat in The Angel's Cry and Wayne Kirstenbaum in The Queen's Throat discussed in great detail the opera singer's body, and his, or mostly her voice, are linked to passion and sexual desire created during the performance. As the erotic is linked to the voice seems to be directly linked to the body. Even if one individual who is watching and observing the diva's body on stage, he or she could not touch it. The singing voice makes the opera performance, though, almost physical. Through the singing voice, the body of opera is not only a visual experience, but also a sensual, sensitive one. This body and its implicit voice, and I'm not talking about the voice today because that's part of the whole project which I'm discussing in Leipzig in May, can be looked at as one major starting point to write music for her, as Richard Wagner did. And this is especially true if you look at a part erotically loaded as Venus. I would like to look now at some body moments of Schröder-Devrient, if you want, to create an idea of her physicality. The first one stems from Gustav Schilling's Music Dictionary from 1838. Ihrem Äußeren nach ist die Schröder-Devrient von etwas übermittlerer Größe, ihr hoher Bau ist ebenmäßig, voll, in schönster Rundung der Formen, der Ausdruck ihrer Physiognomie ist sanft, edel, frei. The following three depictions seem to prove Schilling's descriptions. First, there are two oil paintings I would like to show you very briefly, and I would like to refer to in order to illustrate what Schilling calls schöne Rundungen, nicely curved body. That one I needed to translate. This is a portrait by Joseph Weber showing her in 1839, as Colin Slim found out in his very impressive article on Schröder-Devrient in Music and Art from 2006. This is a portrait by Karl Begas from 1848, today at the Staatliche Kunstsammlung in Dresden. This one is a caricature from maybe the late 1830s or early 1840s, showing her as Valentine, together with Tischacek as Raoul in Les Huguenots from Meyerbeer. She was not only rather tall, actually, and there maybe Schilling has to be corrected a little bit, and big, but also a strong and dominant person, as this picture suggests. Coming to my fourth section, Wagner's Venus. In order to connect the 19th century singer's image and Schröder-Devrient's physicality to the work of Richard Wagner, I would like to take a brief look on the highly sexualized opening of Wagner's opera. Thomas Mann was referring especially to this aspect when he was writing the following. Und dann fährt man ins Theater, natürlich kein gedankenschweres Schauspiel, sondern Oper. Tannhäuser wiegt das Gemüt prächtig ein und die Lüsternheit ist fabelhaft ansteckend. The opera opens with Venus lying down on some kind of a bed, Tannhäuser being in front of her, having his head in her lap, as the stage directions indicate. Im äußersten Vordergrunde links liegt Venus auf einem Lager ausgestreckt, vor ihr knien Tannhäuser, das Haupt in ihrem Schoße. Pigatsky claims that Titian's painting Venus from Urbino, as it was worshipped by Heinze, Junges Deutschland, and also by Heinrich Heine, was the model for Wagner's opening tableau. Even if there's no male person in the Titian painting being very close with his face to the woman's vagina, the general posture of Venus in Wagner's opera could be inspired by this famous, also in the 19th century, famous painting, especially since the corporality of Titian's Venus can be compared to Wagner's first Venus, Wilhelmine Schröder-Devrient, if you think of the pictures I showed you. The description in Wagner's stage direction certainly would not ask for nudity as seen here, but the following sketch by Paul Ludwig Tischbein, supposedly done after the first performance of the opera on October 19th, 1845, suggests that she could have been at least partly naked. If you look at the female figure's breasts and the transparent quality of her skirt. The sketch, though, seems not to represent the stage reality, and it seems to be more an idealized version of that moment in the first scene where Venus tries to keep Tannhäuser from leaving. Tischbein's Venus here has no portrait resemblance with Schröder-Devrient. She actually was the first Venus, creating that part, which probably was even expressly written for her. The face we see seems that one of a young woman, almost looking like a child. Schröder-Devrient was over 40. Think of the Begas painting at that time, which is only 3 years later. The body we see is quite slim and definitely not that of that physicality that what we have seen or what we have in mind now after we've seen and saw this quote. I'm coming to my end and bringing up another example of the connection between sexuality and Wagner's opera. My paper suggests that Wagner's opera should be looked at within the realm of a concept of rather free sexuality. The center where this theme is developed around is the part of Venus as inspired by Schröder-Devrient. Wagner's Venus summarizes the composer's experience with that singer so far by letting her act actually at the beginning in sort of a long pantomime, and that's a rather unusual dramaturgical concept for the opening of an opera, as Manuela Jahrmerker pointed out. Here she could show off her beauty and body as well as use her skills as a genius performer, being both in a private love situation and also being the public figure of a singer being admired by men and actually also by women. How much Wagner was struck by the world of Venus and Schröder-Devrient shows the fact that he originally wanted the opera to be named after this first scenery, and that is der Venusberg, Mont Veneris in English. Wagner, according to Mein Leben, decided against it because medical students, so he writes, told him about the double meaning of the word, also referring to the female anatomy. If we take the many hints seriously that Wagner was deeply and seriously interested in the topic of sexuality, we cannot be sure, as I would argue, that Wagner did pick that title not consciously. He probably knew what he was referring to. Because of Schröder-Devrient's involvement, that's how I'm finishing at that point, but it's still an open project in the performance of the opera, and also because of her inspiration she gave through performance. Wagner referred, and that's my main point, to both features, her genius male side and her female erotic side. Her genius performance skills was basic for the upbringing, and that would be leading to something else, for his ideal of the female singer-actress, the so-called high dramatic soprano, as realized in parts like Isolde, Brünnhilde, or Kundry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anno, and we have about 5 minutes for questions, so please.
There's one.
Thank you. Thank you for that very interesting talk. Just one question. A lot of the accounts that we have of Schröder-Devrient suggest that her voice was very difficult to control, and at times she was not particularly beautiful to hear on stage, and yet at the same time she was an absolutely electrifying actress, and as a result a number of scholars have begun to see her as sort of being, in some ways, being the start of a whole sort of school of singing actresses going along with people like Malibran and Pastor who are contemporary with her. Do you have a few just any comments to make about her actual acting and her vocal acting? I mean, I realize you're going to be talking about this in Leipzig, but it'd be good to hear you just at least give us an anticipation.
Yeah. Actually, we are having quite a big project. We are dealing with singers in the 19th century where we have no records, like sound records of. So we are especially interested in the voice of these singers and also how the voice is part of identity and gender construction. So that's why she's one of our main examples. And I think it's a myth, actually, that she had, as Wagner actually writes himself, had no voice. That's what he says in his main text. But of course, her performance skills and acting skills must have been amazing. And her voice was probably different than any other, like, coloratura, soprano of their time. But obviously, she had a huge range of, how would I call this, like, options of expressing also through the voice. So she was not only also coloratura soprano, actually, so she had also technical skills, but she also was able to use her voice by not only singing, but also by half speaking, or as we say in German, I don't know the word in English, hauchen. So she really used a huge range of vocal expression in order to bring together the acting parts as well. And I think that was her specifics, where she was, genius in that sense, where a lot of writers actually refer to, not only Reitstab.
Thank you very much. It seems like she would be the counterpart to Jenny Lind, and the performing body of Lind, yes, whose sexuality was, yes. Could you comment on that?
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with you. She was more the one, Jenny Lind, where she was also like known for her, how would I put this in English, for her moral integrity, maybe, unlike Schröder-Devrient, where we have that notion of, we really don't know what's going on with her and really going over the top all the time with everything. And I think that was not the case with Jenny Lind, as far as I know. And also the difference is also Jenny Lind was very much promoted by other people, as far as I can see. But Schröder-Devrient, she really puts herself right in the middle of everything, and she takes control. Actually, also in the case with Wagner. So she was older, she was much more famous, and Wagner kind of used her at the beginning also to push for himself. And I think that's also a big difference.
Two questions over here.
I have a somewhat related question. So you did point out this dichotomy of male-female identification, partly based on her roles or trouser roles. But along the line of her sort of sexually charged identity, really as a public figure, was there difficulty at the time in reconciling this sort of sexually charged, this notion of a kind of free woman with all these associations with Junges Deutschland and their free thinking, that whole side of her, which obviously appealed to Wagner and got her into the role of Venus, but with what I take to be another part of her public figure, a very important one, is sort of an emblem of, blonde Germania, a kind of national icon. And she went to Paris, she went all over Europe, and as a kind of cultural ambassador, which would be potentially difficult to reconcile with this notion of this loose living, emblem of loose living singers. Or I guess, am I right that she did have this sort of cultural ambassador status when she traveled around and sang these, also roles like, Agata and, well, Leonora too, I think Orianta, all of which are, demure, good German maidens.
Yes, I'm not really so sure about that whole aspect, and if I say that, I really mean it. I don't know, because she had a huge repertoire, and like our perception of her is that she was mainly responsible for this kind of like repertoire of these parts. First of all, there was no way of German singing in that way, and she certainly was one of the first pushing for this. And there are also reports, like one by Ralf von Barnhagen, where she says, "Oh, she invents the German way of singing, combining a couple of things." But she was also like, especially in London, as far as I know, she also did the Italian repertoire very much. So she did not only sing Fidelio. So I'm not really so sure about it, what's the myth and what's really happening in London and Paris in the 1830s.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, in addition to actual singing style, or there was someone was suggesting there's this notion she represented a German singing style, which was, for many people, a bad style.
Okay.
But whether she also tried to construct a counter identity as a good, upright, solid, Bürgerin, and not just this louche actress, singer.
That I'm not so sure, because we also have record of like the performance she did together with Maria Malibran, and they switched parts in Othello. So they both did once the female and once the male part, and obviously Schröder-Devrient was more convincing in the male part when she did Othello, actually. And that is not really the ideal of a Biedermeier 19th century woman, right?
Yeah, there's a little anecdote she tells in one of those early memoirs about her, late after she'd retired from the stage, and she's having a dinner in Dresden at her house, and she says, "Oh, the stew needs a little bit of bay leaf," and she runs to one of her myrtle crowns on the wall, and she picks a leaf off and throws it into the stew pot. And that sort of seems like she, at least retrospectively, was trying to say, well, yes, I'm really just a good housewife after all, don't disregard all this.
Oh, no, she was also struggling with that, no question about it, especially looking at her situation being a mother, for example, where she was not able to take care of her children. And there are records also of legal sort where we know she was like long letters with her husband while she should like be seeing her children. And she was certainly also very conflicted, and she was also a very diverse person and very diverse character, which is very difficult to put one draw on the other, I think. That's what we are learning right now, at least in the project.
Just one last question from Tony, and then we have to move on, I'm afraid.
This actually builds on your remark just now about the acceptability of women, especially kind of this bourgeois, upper class social status. Because what struck me most in your talk and your title for that one section about opera singers as working women is that this is precisely the moment that working women are basically pushed to the margins. If they are truly working class women, they're not really talked about. That's the problem of the proletariat of the working classes, that women can't have their appropriate functions. So I'm curious about the situation of the genius, of the prima donna, and what that says, that in this one isolated instance, that is in the cultural expression practice of opera, women are allowed, A, to work, They are allowed to be objectified and kind of given this expression of a sensuality that is generally denied bourgeois women and are, for that matter, denied bourgeois men.
I think, of course, again, this is a very important point, like talking about class, but also talking about like social places, spaces, so to speak. And also, we also have a dichotomy here, Germany and France, because like much of the experiences also Wagner was referring to was, of course, Paris at the end of the 1830s. But I think the theater in general was able to open up something else, which was not the case in regular life, and that's for the good or for the worse. The worse part I like kind of elaborated on, saying the whole prostitution and like availability topic was part of it. But then on the other hand, it was also possible to be somebody else and to be perceived as somebody else, as a woman. And when I was talking about that dichotomy, I think we have to also rethink our concept of 19th century gender conception. Sometimes it's not as black and white as it seems. And that's part of our approach, actually, to read that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Perhaps you could hand that over.
Yes, sure.
To